Hey guys, so today what we're going to discuss is about keeping your knives sharp. I should actually keep mine clean, but it's about keeping your blade sharp at home. So it depends on what kind of knives you have and how much you care about them. If you have just basic knives like these little cheap things, which works quite well, there's these ones are fairly cheap, they're not that expensive. If you got them and you're not too worried about them, what I suggest is using one of these. There's all sorts of different types of knife brands in regards to that. I'm going backwards here. So there are different ones where they're just two little pieces of metal. If you can kind of see that. They're kind of two pieces of metal. Your blade goes across them and just sharpens a bit, cuts into the metal. The only thing about this, if you do really treasure your knives, if you got a really nice blade or whatever, I wouldn't suggest using these, but if they're cheap and something you use at home, these are great. They sharpen things really quick and they're pretty awesome. There's different brands, there's different types. You could, like this was only $5 or $6. You can just buy these on eBay, or you can go and get the more expensive ones. They're the same kind of things. You just put it on the table and you just grind away at it, and it sharpens your blade really quick. You can run it over the honing steel and it works quite well. But if you really do have a good blade and you want to use a decent sharpener, I would suggest getting a stone. Excuse my kids there. They're playing out the back and making a fair bit of noise. So a stone, this is what we need to discuss. So how do you sharpen your knife with a stone? So what you got is all stones there. There's different roughness of these. They always got one harder side and a smoother side. This is a diamond cut one. I like these diamond ones. They're really good. They really cut into the blade and they're really easy to use. Most of the time you can use two things. You can either use oil or water. I like to put a bit of water on mine to start off. I find the oil just gets a bit too messy and it kind of creates this residue and it's not that pleasant, but if you don't mind using it, they're good. So the trick is, what you're trying to do when a knife is blunt, what happens is it creates, your blade is kind of like this. It's like this. What you want is a blade that does this. So what you're trying to do is sharpening off and breaking off the side so that way it becomes like that and it becomes this sharp edge. So what you do is when you're cutting into these, you need to go in a sliding fashion and you're just cutting onto one side so that way when it's blunt like this, you kind of slowly bring in this into an edge, but it kind of creates this burr. So in other words, the metal sort of comes around and it creates a burr, and then when you come through and you cut through the other end, you get this perfect sharpness. What you don't want is one of these and it's kind of like this. How do I do it? Like that. You want to actually cut all that metal so that way it becomes this perfect metal like that. So how do you do that? You get your steel. You can get these for about $100, $50 maybe at the cheapest, but don't skimp on these. These are, you can get really expensive ones, but around the $100 ones you get a pretty good deal. So what you do is you start from the back and you want to go between, there's people different, between 10 and 30 degrees. The average knife, you need to look at the blade and it's about 30 degrees. So mine works around that. It depends a lot on how thick your blade is. So like these ones are quite thin, so it kind of tapers in. And this one has a very thin blade and it tapers right in really finely. So these, you would almost need to go on almost a 15 degree edge, just a very fine edge. These ones are a bit thicker, so all you do is you just look at it, you look at your blade, and then you try and work on from that. It doesn't really matter, you don't need to be too fussed about it. So all you're doing is you're getting from one point and you're pushing forward and you come back. Now this is how I do it in the workplace. It speeds things up, but if you're practicing this at the start, you're better off learning to go backwards. So you're applying a bit more pressure on it, going backwards, and then you're just coming forward with it. So what you're trying to do is creating that burr like we was talking about. So it kind of comes across and it creates this little burr. So you're bringing it on the one side and creates a burr, and then you repeat it with the other end, and you're going backwards until you create and cutting into it. So you just do this repeatedly for a period of time, and then you go back. You might need to work on it a bit depending on the softness or the hardness of the knife, depending on how blunt this knife was in the first place, and you just need to work on it. So how do you tell when something has a burr? You often can just feel by running your thumb just gently over the top, you'll feel it kind of catching, and that's when you got it right. If it's kind of really blunt, you can feel on the other side. If you was to feel on a blunt, it just kind of rolls over, but on a sharp blade, it catches. So that's what you need to practice. So you want to put a bit more pressure on it coming away, backwards, and a lighter pressure going forwards, backwards. It's a good idea with these is to try and use the whole stone. So you go from, I like to start from the tip and work all the way to the back, and vice versa. Tip and working the whole thing, whole stone. Because if you just work on these little bits like this, what you do is you wear out a certain part of your stone, and it's not very pleasant, and it wears out your stone, and it becomes uneven. You don't want that. You want to try and use as much of the stone as you can with a reasonable amount of pressure, and you just go back and forwards until you feel that. Once you kind of feel that little thing, you go on to the finer side and you polish it off with the same movements. So you're pushing a bit of pressure on your thumb and a little bit on your finger. You don't need to put a great amount of pressure, you're just kind of letting the stone do the work, and you go back like so. And then after you've done that, you can feel the blade, you can feel it all the way across. Sometimes you won't, like that's a little bit blunter there, you can feel it catching on your thumb versus it not doing that. And at the end you can just put it on the steel to hone it in to get it all in alignment. Same thing with this. I've used this before. These knives are really sharp all the time. It's very rarely that it doesn't. I keep these quite sharp because I use these a lot. You're best to have sharp knives at home. It's safer because you're not rolling around, you're not messing things up. You're not cutting into things and it rolls over and it'll take out your fingers. You're actually safer to have super sharp knives over blunt knives. So that is all you need to do to create sharp knives at home. So with that one, you can test, well, I think the best thing is to test your knives on tomatoes. Soft tomatoes are really hard to cut, and capsicums, the thing of capsicums, or you can get a piece of paper and it should slice pretty easy. So that's how you, oh, gee, I ripped that. Yeah. So they're the things that you need to remember. You need to work out the angle of your blade, you need to think out the thickness, and then you're working on the burr of creating the blade to come in and have that slight angle like this, and then you cut it down the other end and it evens it out, and then that's when you polish it. You do not want to do it before then. You want to get that feeling of that metal that has actually kind of come across, and you can feel that little catchingness. It's almost like a serratedness. And once you've done that, you sharpen, you use it on the polishing end, which is often the diamond side of things. You clean that up, you use it over honing steel. Some people would go over and use it over a piece of leather, but gee, I'm not really shaving my face with it, I'm just cutting tomatoes. So there you go, that's how you sharpen your knives. Thanks very much, see you next time.